Let me do this first. And we bring. I am joined with myself. Tim Anderson is a writer, internationalist, academic, director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies and Counter-Hegemonic Studies site. Tim, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Thanks, Jamal. I'm well, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I'm running a little bit late.
No, you're perfectly okay. You're perfectly okay. Ceasefire. Ceasefire. Give me your thoughts.
Well, there's no real agreed ceasefire. It's a declaration by Trump attempting to impose himself on the Israelis and particularly on Iran, of course. What's happened is that there's been a response by the Israelis, which they've immediately breached. And then the Iranians have celebrated the fact that they forced the Israelis to stop firing. But they had not agreed to it so long as the Israelis kept firing. The Israelis resumed firing, and so Iran resumed firing. So it's a blame game where the US or Trump is trying to construct an idea that somehow the Iranians are responsible for breaching a ceasefire that he unilaterally declared. But in reality, there was no agreement.
Yeah, the foreign minister even pointed out, he says, Iran repeatedly made clear Israel launched a war on Iran, not the other way around. As of now, there's no agreement on a ceasefire or cessation of military operations. However, provided that the Israeli regime stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people, no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, we have no intention to continue our response afterwards. The final decision on the cessation of our military operations will be made later. Now, to be fair, you did get the Israeli government saying, okay, we'll accept it. And you got this coming out of Iran's security body saying they would accept it. But as you pointed out, immediately after this, Israel comes out and says, oh my God, Iran violated the ceasefire. And Iran comes out and says, Israel violated the ceasefire. I also pointed out...
Well, there's no violation because they hadn't agreed to anything. And Trump, of course, the details of these things are important. And Trump had said that the Iranians had to agree to a ceasefire 12 hours before the Israelis. In other words, giving the opportunity for the Israelis to keep firing after Iran had stopped.
Yeah, which was nonsense.
No.
Yeah. No, okay, fair enough. And that's why I guess I said ceasefire in quotes. But they did agree in a cessation of hostilities with Iran getting the last shot in. And Iran, of course, getting the last shot in because from their point of view, well, not just from their point of view, Israel is the one that started the war. And so this was the last shot that Iran fired 4 minutes before the ceasefire, and I'm calling it ceasefire just as a colloquialism, as it started. Whew. Whew. Some coffee on that one. Whew. Where do you think this goes from here? Truth of the matter is Israel has violated every ceasefire it is engaged in and is violating ceasefire with Lebanon as we speak. Now,
that's right.
Every time they violate a ceasefire, and in Gaza, thank you. And every time they violate the ceasefire, the U.S. ignores the violations of their ceasefire, but then blames the victim for responding to the ceasefire. And I guess my thing is, are we to expect something like that now?
Yes, of course. It's an image game where Trump is really motivated mainly by what serves his image, and he pretended to be a peacemaker. We know that's false. He pretended to be a deal maker. He showed himself incapable of being a deal maker. He invited the Iranians to be involved in diplomacy and then attacked them in the middle of that diplomacy. He tore up the treaty 10 years ago that they had over nuclear development. Of course, the agreement was never anything to do with nuclear weapons. So really, Trump has rigged these things all the way along to try and disempower Iran. It's been trying to remove the capacity that Iran has to influence events in the region because, as we know, Iran has been the main sponsor of the resistance in Palestine, which has kept the Palestinians alive, basically. And that's what is resented most by the Israelis and by the US.
But Tim, is it fair to say that that failed and that the reason that Donald Trump is pushing for the ceasefire is not for his image, but because he acknowledges or understands on some level that A, Israel is running out of missiles, B, the damage that they've taken, they can't go, like meaning a colony of 8 million people cannot absorb the damage of a country of 90 million people. And the attacks that Iran has been launching may have been more damaging than what we realize. Meaning, Israel was not able to accomplish this objective of regime change, nor was the U.S. able to accomplish this objective of regime change. And Israel is taking damage in a way that exceeds what the U.S., or for that matter, Israel wants, which is why Israel seemed to be the party that was begging for a ceasefire. Give me your take on that, or do you disagree with that?
No, yes, you're right in a way that it's, of course, not just the population, also the fact that the territory that the Israelis control is rather confined compared to Iran. So the infrastructure, the military facilities and so on, the refineries and so on are in small areas. They're easy to target and easy to hit in many respects. So they've been suffering a lot of damage, but I don't really think that was at the forefront of Trump's calculation, because what Trump has really done, in effect, I mean, as opposed to his words, and of course he's hoping that everyone will pay attention to his words. He attacks and then calls for peace, this type of language. He hopes people will pay attention to those words, but really what he's done is unified the different factions in Iran, some of whom were quite reluctant to engage directly with conflict with the Israelis. They were still hoping to get some benefit out of an agreement with the North Americans. He's mobilised them, he's angered all of them, he's got the population behind the government. Both of the major factions, the so-called principalists and the liberals in Iran, are now unified in their response to retaliate against the North American troops in the Persian Gulf and also against the Israelis. And he's also encouraged at the same time Netanyahu and co to keep attacking Iran, because they are enormously encouraged by the fact that eventually they incited the Washington to get involved in attacks on Iran. So they feel buoyed up, even though they've been suffering all this sort of damage. So I think the real effect of Trump is to perpetuate this war. He's guaranteed escalation by attacking directly Iran. He's guaranteed the ongoing conflict between Iran and the Israelis. And as you say, the Iranians really have the upper hand. They've been able to do much more damage. The Israelis have killed people. They've killed several hundred people in Iran, there's no doubt about that. But they haven't done the same sort of damage that the Iranians have in recent days.
Yeah, especially by percentage of land mass. Like, it's a colony of 8 million people. And I want to add another thing to that. They have passports. Like, it's one thing if you're sipping a cappuccino as Palestinians starve and get killed. It's another thing when there are bombs raining down on your head and you're spending hours in bomb shelters, hours in sewers, or hours under bridges, and you're under threat constantly. When your house gets blown up, you take your passport and leave. And so, you have this secondary situation of an Israeli state that just can't function for this kind of long attrition warfare that Iran could. Like, I guess from my point of view, what they wanted to accomplish, they were not able to accomplish. I agree with you that this is not stopping anything. This is, the beginning of a longer, drawn-out conflict where the U.S. wants to overthrow the government. But in their first, which is what this is, they did not seem to succeed. And one last thing I want to add: this is Trump, and I'm not entirely sure what is going to be said here, but apparently, because of all this talk about somebody broke the ceasefire, and they're finger pointing, this is what Trump comes out with.
Yes, he's trying to make a blame game out of it and try and.
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on it.
Actually,
so I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
So he is saying apparently he's unhappy with everybody in this process. He's like, I'm unhappy with everybody. I'm unhappy with Israel. I'm unhappy with Tehran. I'm unhappy with everybody because everybody violated the ceasefire. Look, if you say that in 12 hours we're going to have a ceasefire and you attack before the 12 hours, that is not a violation. It's just weird in the way he's thinking about this stuff. But you're right. He's having this kind of weird blame game. What do you make of that?
Well, it's his style, isn't it? And, at one point, a lot of the North American people agreed with it. The problem is that MAGA has its own crisis now, basically, because MAGA never thought they were going to have a war on behalf of the Israelis. And there's quite a reaction, I believe, domestically against this at the time. But this is classic Trump. He wants to be able to say, this is the rules, and everyone do what I says, and cooperate with me and we'll get along fine, more or less. But the Israelis are encouraged by what he's been doing, I think, but really they are also going to claim some level of autonomy there, and they've got their own rationale about how they are persecuted and victims and so on. You see a lot of Israelis, by the way, going on and saying, look, we're firing at these targets in Iran and they're hitting our civilians, because, of course, the military censors in the Israeli entity are only allowing pictures of residential buildings. They're not allowing pictures of infrastructure and military sites and so on. So there's a very distorted image coming through. But when you see the Israeli people on social media saying, poor us, we're being attacked, go and have a look at the comments. They are being, as it's called, ratioed by all the people saying, well, suck it up, do more, Iran, and you never give a thought to Gaza about this. That's, of course, the background here. It's not even just about, in people's minds in the region, it's not just about the Israelis attacking Iran, but the fact that they are still killing people in Lebanon. I'm in Lebanon at the moment. They just bombed Nabatea in the south recently. They killed 3 people, a man and his 2 sons, for example. They are still killing people in Gaza. So this is in the back of the minds of all the people in the region and in the people of Iran. And many of them are saying, they're begging their government and saying, don't stop now, keep going, destroy this cancer in the region, which is really waging war on every country of every independent people of the region, on Yemen, on Lebanon, on Syria, on Iraq, on Iran. They want to get rid of this cancer in the region. There are people on the streets in Iran now begging their government to keep going and finish the job, basically. And Trump is helping that, I think, because his actions have ensured escalation. They've ensured, as I said, a very strong degree of unity within Iran behind the government, what it's doing.
The picture that I'm showing here is at one of those food distribution centers. I've shown plenty of these where people are starving. They're trying to get food, and Israel is using these as just areas where they can just kill people, like just opening up fire. I've shown where soldiers with machine guns were firing at people who were trying to get food. As we was watching the war, this is what took place day after day after day. And, I showed the image of Lebanon where they had killed all of those people in Lebanon, effectively breaking the ceasefire also. I think there's something else going on too, though. I think Donald Trump is trying to act as if Israel was a rogue actor, which I think is nonsense. He's trying to act in that, well, I'm unhappy with Israel, as if Israel is doing something purely on its own, as opposed to the U.S., giving the green light for. I don't know how he tries to ignore all of his tweets after Israel attacked, where he was out there crowing. We told Iran that they should have accepted the deal. We told them that they should have done this. This is what happens, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's like, I'm unhappy with Israel. I told that we should have had ceasefire. I think he's trying to create
Jamal, this is very deep in US politics. Biden administration was doing the same thing, wasn't it? They're saying, oh, we're not happy with these settlements, but here's some more money to build more settlements. We're not happy with you killing civilians, but here's some more weapons to bomb the civilians. So this is a very deep hypocrisy in the US system. Basically, the Israelis have been working as an arm, effectively an extension of US military into the region. A large part of its operations are co-controlled by the head of so-called CENTCOM, which is based in Qatar, which just got bombed by the Iranians. And so the head of CENTCOM has been regularly in the Israeli entity coordinating the attacks in Gaza. And so this is really an ongoing theme of US-Israeli relations. They are joined together and they are they're performing an important function for the US, just as they performed an important function for the British before.
What do you think happens now? Especially some of the reporting that came out was startling to people who cared about preservation of the Iranian state. And a lot of that boiled down to Iran wanted to be a solo independent actor. Russia asked them multiple times if they wanted help or if they wanted air defense. They said, no, we don't want help. We want to be our own actor, which left them far more vulnerable than they would have been under normal circumstances. I mean, for God's sake, the monster was coming through the forest. It was obviously going to knock at their door, right? I mean, one government after the next had failed. This was U.S. policy going back for 20-something years. And they could see that monster coming. And it seemed that the Iranian government believed that it could negotiate with that monster. I mean, the monster is like blood dropping out of his mouth. Its hands are full of blood. And the belief that, well, we can negotiate with that monster. Are they aware now that that is not on the table? That the objective of the U.S., the objective of Israel functioning as a proxy of the U.S. is to destroy that state and reshape the Middle East American power and to diminish Russia and China in the process? What does Iran need to do in this moment, in this pause? Because that's what I'm going to call it, a pause. What do they need to do now in order to ensure the integrity of their state? Considering, because I do accept this as Iran was able to beat back the monster. If only for a period of time, they were able to beat it back. And now the monster is going to retool, reload, and come up with a new strategy to go after Iran. But that means Iran also needs to, on some level, take action in preservation of the state. From your point of view, or if you disagree with anything I just said, say so. But what do they need to do?
No, I think, you've got a point there, but you have to recognise that Iran is a very stable country. There's a high degree of trust by the people in its government, but there are important factions within the political elite of the government. There's a big liberal faction which is more or less in power now, and there's a big faction which is called hardliners or conservatives outside and principalists inside. And they have had some differences in approaches, basically. In particular, the Liberals have been more inclined to try and look for some form of reconciliation with the Western powers, particularly with the US. And they were under more pressure more than 10 years ago when they did that JCPOA agreement, for example, because at that time they didn't have the strong relations that they have now with Russia and China, which continue in terms of technology and finance and commerce and so on. Even though they're not there militarily, but they're not needed militarily. Iran is a very capable, strong power. It's shown in the last 10 days, I suppose, that it's able to take on the Israelis, who on paper seem to have a very strong military, but it's based on a lot of very expensive US equipment, and that equipment hasn't shown up to defend it. We've seen the failure of the Iron Dome and other facilities in the Israelis. They can't stop these new generation of missiles that the Iranians have. So I don't think Iran has a problem in defending itself at the moment, but it has also the objective to try and keep the high moral ground in the diplomatic stakes. They know that most of the world now supports Iran in this conflict, and they want to keep it that way, basically. So there are some questions about their political orientation, but I don't think there's any doubt that the Iranians can persist if it's going to be an ongoing exchange of hardware with the Israelis. The Israelis are going to be on the ground, if not now, in 2 weeks' time, basically, and the Iranians have a lot of stockpiles of weapons still to come out, whereas the Israelis are burning through their air defence very, very quickly, and it's an expensive air defence, So I think the Iranians will keep going. The question is, will there be some suit for peace? Will there be some actual ceasefire, not a Trump-announced unilateral ceasefire, forced on them in some diplomatic way? Because the Iranians are still sensitive to diplomacy, and they want to maintain that global support they have at the moment.
I think I disagree with that, and not strongly, but I understand where you're coming from. I do get it, but how do you turn down Russian air defense? And if you think of the number of people that got killed in this exchange, maybe 1,000 people, Russia is the best air defense on the planet, and if there's a willingness to share the air defense and to train your people on the air defense, how many of those people would still be alive today if they had that? I mean, Israel wasn't flying bombs. They were using jets. And if those jets were being knocked out the sky using air defense, wouldn't Iran have been better off in that situation?
Look, in terms of the military capacity, there is exchange between Russia and Iran, and there has been for several years. But what they've done is they have shared technology and they've industrialized it locally. For example, the Shahed generation of drones that Iran produced were not exported to Russia. The technology was sent to Russia and Russia produced them there. The S-300 type of air defense the technology has been shared with Iran. They have produced their own version of it. It's actually been very good. It's been quite effective. But let's remember that the gains that let's say the imperial side has made in recent times is that they now have full control of the skies over Syria. and mostly control of the skies over Iraq, basically. And certainly it goes without saying, I suppose, the Saudis and Jordan, who've been collaborators for a long time. But the fact that they got rid of the Assad government in Syria meant they can go with impunity across the skies in Syria and fire their missiles from Syria or Iraq at Iranian targets. They have good targeting technology for these sorts of things. So it's not that the Iranians don't have good technology. They are sharing it with the Russians. There is cooperation there, but they don't need the Russian Air Force to be there as the Syrians in the past needed the Russians to be there to help them, basically. The Iranians have very good technology. And of course, perhaps they were caught wrong-footed when those assassinations were carried out. There's certainly a lot of criticisms could be made about how they responded to those attacks and how they allowed the assassination of senior Palestinian officials, for example, in Tehran, during the inauguration of the President Pezeshkian. There are criticisms to be made of Iran, but not that it doesn't have capacity. It does have capacity and also air defense capacity. But nevertheless, they are dealing with an Israeli regime which was supported by NATO and by the US from the beginning. The US was involved from the beginning. This direct involvement in the attacks on Iran is something that's come more recently, but they were deeply involved in the air defense of the Israelis and helping plan the Israeli attacks long before, basically. So they are dealing with Iran is dealing with a substantial enemy.
No, agreed. No, 1,000% agree with you. They are, which is, and I guess that's why I take this angle of point of view. You're dealing with monsters. Like, these people have just slaughtered their way through the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. They've killed and destroyed all of these states. And now they're coming to you as being the last thing standing with all of the support of NATO, Israel, and the US backing this one colony. I guess that's my concern. I'm not saying this out of raw criticism of Iran as if to be condemnative. I'm saying this because I'm concerned at the level of force that's being allied against it. That's all. That's where it's coming from. It's not coming from a bad place. It's coming because I want to see the preservation of the state. And it seems like,
I think there's a local concern here too that's shared with you, that are they fighting with a hand behind their back? Why have they not unleashed more? And anyway, the response, I'm not trying to sum up on it here. I'm just reporting in a way what's going on. The Iranian commanders have said, look, we have a lot of allies that will join with us. And they're talking about the Yemenis. They're talking about the independent resistance factions in Iraq and so on. We have allies who will join in with us, but we don't want them to do it at the moment because we are gradually increasing the pressure on the Israelis. They started off attacking military sites. They've moved to infrastructure sites, for example. The Israelis are trying to pretend, that they're targeting civilians and so on. Of course, that's always been the propaganda that they've run and that the US clients have run, basically. But nevertheless, the Iranians are engaged in a hearts and minds or propaganda campaign, really. They have the high moral ground in many respects. They want to keep it that way. They want to demonstrate that they carry out war in a way that's different to the way that the imperial powers carry it out, basically. So they are doing it gradually, and they want, for example, the flocks of the Israelis, as you mentioned, who are going to Paris and Germany and to Cyprus. Many of them are catching boats to Cyprus now. There's a whole side story there that you could talk about, what the people in Cyprus are facing now. Also the warplanes are taking refuge in the British military base on Cyprus too. There, so Erdogan's Turkey is involved in this too, and the British are involved in this too. So there's a lot of allies or collaborators with the Israelis at the moment, particularly the Germans, the British, and the North Americans, but others too. Erdogan has been involved in this too. So the Iranians are rather content that they're helping drive some more thousands or tens of thousands of Israelis out of occupied Palestine, because their idea is the future of this part of the world is not a so-called two-state solution, which the South Africans will tell you what the Bantustan solution was in the 80s, and they've rubbished that very effectively. But it's to have a single democratic state in Palestine, in historic Palestine. And that means everyone who lives in the state of Palestine, plus the historic refugees, have a say in what sort of regime is there. So if there's to be a solution in occupied Palestine or a democratic Palestine, then the Iranians have this in the back of their minds. They've been talking about it for a long time, about a referendum for a single democratic state in Palestine. And if there is a an exodus, let's say, double entendre intended. If there's an exodus of the colonists to their original homes in Europe, various parts of Europe or perhaps North America, then it will be easier to deal with this referendum. Basically, it'll be the people who more genuinely based in Palestine. That includes also, of course, the Israelis who were born there, because we've got 3 generations of Israelis there. So the idea of driving all of the colonists out is really an extremely difficult proposition, because there are people who, even my age, who were born there and grew up there, basically. So, but nevertheless, they are relatively content with the fact that gradually increasing the targets, from military to destroying the Mossad headquarters to destroying the refineries and the power plants in Haifa and so on, destroying the ports. Yemen shut down the port of Eilat. That's now bankrupt, basically. So the airport in Ben Gurion is barely not working at all. That's why people are leaving by boat. But the Iranians are relatively happy with the process that's going on there, because they have an eye, at least half an eye, on the situation in Palestine and the future of Palestine too. Unfortunately, the Israelis, as you pointed out, they're still killing people in Gaza and in Lebanon. And just yesterday, as I said, they killed these people in South Lebanon. Apparently, they still have enough capacity to burn to keep killing people in their periphery, in their occupied areas. Yeah.
Amazing, ain't it? It put me in the mind of the Nazis, where the Soviets are rolling into Berlin and they still got the ovens going. They still, using steel and materials for the camps. And you're like, don't you need that stuff to defend your country? And apparently their response is no, killing these Palestinians and the Lebanese matter more, which is just mind-blowing to me. What do you think Israel is thinking right now? They engaged in war.
The regime or the people?
Both.
Well, look, the regime is desperate. As you know, the Netanyahu himself is facing all of these corruption cases in the courts. The last time he was in court, he claimed to be sick and somehow got excused from finishing his evidence that day, or finishing his cross-examination. He's got a corruption scandal with Qatar, which is now under attack by Iran because it hosts the biggest US military base in the whole of West Asia, and the central post, or the headquarters of CENTCOM, so-called CENTCOM, which is the Pentagon's way of saying that they run West Asia or the Middle East, basically. So Netanyahu knows when that's finished, his time is up in domestic Israeli politics. Of course, Netanyahu is not the be-all and end-all of the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime is much broader, and there are many others waiting in the wing, including in the US, I suggest, particularly liberal Zionists, who used to talk a lot about this so-called two-state solution. And some of them still are. You've got some very articulate liberal Zionists, like Jeffrey Sachs, for example, who people pushing the two-state solution, which is a form of normalization, let's remember. This is saying, okay, it's okay to have this racially based state which carries out apartheid policies, and try to pretend that the genocide that we've seen in Gaza for the last 20 or 21 months is something exceptional and doesn't have its roots in the apartheid system itself. Yeah. So I think those who take the one democratic state approach will say, no, you have to dismantle this apartheid. It is, after all, a crime against humanity, as some reports have pointed out, and the international community has a responsibility to dismantle an apartheid regime, basically. That's the root of the conflict here. Of course, anything seems better than the genocides that's been going on in Gaza, but we have to be careful. There's going to be a next stage of a struggle, I believe, and I think many of the more mature perspectives over in this part of the world are seeing that and saying we want to make sure that there is going to be a chance for the people in Palestine to vindicate themselves. It's not going to be that Netanyahu regime falls and suddenly there's a path to a free Palestine. There's going to be a second stage of struggle, I believe, with the liberal Zionists saying, as they did in Namibia and South Africa and Zimbabwe, when you dismantle a racial state, you have attempts to try and hang on to the privileges of the colonists. And they did that in Zimbabwe with disastrous effects, and in South Africa and Namibia with some disastrous effects. So there are lessons there, good and bad, for Palestine, I believe. And so in terms of the Israeli regime, of course, there are some that are dedicated to a complete and utter ethnic cleansing of everything from as the flag suggests, from the Nile to the Euphrates. And as Herzl said, this was the idea of a greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Imagine how many Arab countries that includes, basically. But then the liberal Zionists imagined that there was some sort of accommodation that could be there while preserving a lot of the gains, the territorial gains and the colonial gains of the colony. So there's going to be some differences there if the Israeli regime collapses, if Netanyahu collapses and we have some new, Israel Mark II there. From the point of view of the people, they've hardened really because the liberal Zionists no longer dominate. If they ever really dominated the Israeli population, many of them left a long time ago, basically, and we haven't seen a liberal Zionist government in the Israeli regime for many years. And those that were in the Labour Party governments, for example, are denouncing Netanyahu and the regime now because they know that if the myth of two states goes down the drain, then they're on the South African road. Basically, they recognise that there's no viable future for a South African road for the Israelis. And so, many of the people in Israel, they've aligned themselves with this extremist view without much room for compromise at all. They're going to be very disillusioned. They're going to leave, or they're going to, I don't think they'll fight to the death because they really saw, as privileged people do, the occupied Palestine as some sort of holiday camp. But now they have to go into the army. They have to put their children's lives at risk and so on. It's not such a holiday camp as it was. And I think that's important. And that's why many of the people in the Arab and Muslim countries around occupied Palestine are now saying to Iran, thank you, Iran. Keep going, finish the job. We have to get rid of this aggravation because there'll never be peace in this part of the world until the apartheid regime is dismantled.
Do you, and this could be the last question, do you see that happening though? I mean, they are literally on a killing spree. As we speak, They are on a killing spree. They haven't stopped. And it seems that they are not stopping, meaning Iran, I agree with you, Iran is going with the ceasefire, quote unquote, for however long it lasts or whatever that means. But that just means Israel continues killing people, hundreds a day.
Well, their capacity is being weakened. Their capacity is being undermined. I think another 2 weeks of Iranian missiles, and the Israeli war machine is going to be on the ground now. It's already seriously weakened, basically. It's true that many of them are going to fight to the end, as you said, and I think it's an appropriate parallel with the Nazi regime. They're going to be people in the bunkers now. They are in the bunkers now in Mossad, what remains of Mossad, basically. So they're going to be people who are going to fight to the end, basically. And that's why I think, although there are many weaknesses in the Israeli regime, and it's entirely dependent on its foreign sponsors now, that's why in Gaza, the atrocities you were talking about there of the people being shot as they were looking for food, actually being carried out by private contractors from the US. They are already there doing those sorts of tasks. CENTCOM is already there at the command level, so the US is already very deeply involved. Not recently, back from the Biden regime. Remember Genocide Joe? This was all happening then. The Biden regime had its CENTCOM commanders in Tel Aviv or West Jerusalem, and they were deeply involved in Gaza back then. They're involved in it now. Trump's own history of trying to, because of course the US is behind all of this and is also dangerous at this time. I think a bigger part of your question might be, why is the US so dangerous at this time? Not just the Trump regime. And I think the answer to that is this is a time of what I call wars of hegemonic decline. Basically, the US sees its power declining. I mean, the deep state, when I say the US, the deep state sees its power declining in the world. And these hybrid wars, they're typically hybrid wars, which involve, economic warfare, sanctions or tariffs or whatever it is, and propaganda wars and proxy wars, using proxy militia like Boko Haram in Africa and ISIS in West Asia, all of those sorts of things. Those hybrid wars have expanded enormously in the last 20 years because the US is losing its grip on the world. It fears other big or regional powers, Iran, Russia, China, of filling the so-called gap or the so-called vacuum that's left behind when US influence retreats, basically. And so the US is particularly dangerous at this time. Not that it means it's more powerful. So being dangerous doesn't mean you are more powerful. It means you are more dangerous because you're in a corner and you fear losing the influence that you had.
Tim, fantastic breakdown, man. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Tim Anderson, he's a writer, internationalist, academic, director of Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies. Tim, where can people find you, by the way?
Well, I'm on Twitter and some of the other social media, not Facebook, but I'm on Twitter. That's probably the best place to find me, TimAnd2037. And also there's a Counter-Hegemonic Studies site they can find me through.
Very cool. Thank you, my man. You be safe, okay? Have a good one.
Thank you, Jamal. Thanks.
All right. Great breakdown by